we know that Kiddush on Friday night is a mitzvah d'oraisa. I'm not going to get into the issue right now of yayin, whether yayin for Kiddush is d'oraisa. That we've discussed in the past, and it's still a very profound question. But what I would like to discuss with you is the statement of the Magen Avraham. Now, you may recall that we were going through the Magen Avraham in this little kuntris, which is called Mitzvahs Kiddush, and we had a whole series on Mitzvahs Kiddush. This was the second booklet that we studied in the 4-part series on Kiddush. And in this booklet, he quotes the Magen Avraham. So it's a little bit easier for me to use the booklet for that Magen Avraham. So in the booklet, again, in my edition at least, it appears on page Chaf. I don't remember anymore what page it's on in your edition. Maybe David would tell us. In any event, this is the Magen Avraham in, of course, Hilchos Shabbos Simon Reish Ayin Aleph. And he writes that as far as Kiddush d'oraisa is concerned, you could be Yotzei your mitzvah in Tefillah. That's the breakthrough of the Magen Avraham. Just give me 1 second, sorry. Benira Li, says the Magen Avraham, to be the Raisa Bekidush She'omer B'Tfila Sagi. He fulfills his chiyuv. The Kroksiv Zocher es Yom HaShabbos. Barei Zocher also. Period. So we have a bracha of Kiddush, which we recite in Tefillah, in Arvis, and Kiddush al Yayin, or Kiddush Makom Suda, all these nuances and requirements and conditions are all D'Rabbanan. And on a d'oraisa level, all I need is to remember that it's Shabbos and to be Mekadesh through Amiras Peh, without a kos, and without Makom Suda. And therefore, the Magen Avraham comes up with this idea of, he calls it Venira Li, which indicates that he has no earlier source for this, that you could be Yotzi this mitzvah in Tefillah. That's the Magen Avraham. And hopefully you recall that. Now, in this same booklet, in my edition, it's on page Chaf Vav, he quotes the Minchas Chinuch. And the Minchas Chinuch writes the following. He says, Kol Achronim Kulam, it seems that this was universally accepted. It's not just the Magen Avraham. Bachzu, the Yotzei B'Tefillah, Tefillah Shabbos, Yedei Kiddush Hayom Min HaTorah. Li Osam HaPoskim, the Kiddush Al Yayin Hu Rak D'Rabbanan. So again, we're not going through the two shitas, but according to that shita, which is the shita of the Rambam and the Rashba and Tosfos in the name of Rabbeinu Tam in more than one place, that you could be Yotzei Kiddush d'oraisa with Amira B'Peh, without Yayin, then he says that the Achronim agree I would add the words, they accepted the Magen Avraham, that can be Yotze with Kiddush in Tefillah. You don't need Yayin on a Doraisa level. So with Doraisa, you fulfilled your Chiyuv in Kiddush. The Minchas Chinuch says the following, that L'didi tamua ma'od. I don't understand it, says the Minchas Chinuch. He's really throwing a bomb kasha against all the Achronim, he says, that accepted this principle universally, that you can be Yotzei Kiddush Doraisa and Tefillah. He says, Kevon de Menusach HaTefillah shel Leil Shabbos, Ein anu mazkirim Yitzias Mitzrayim. There's no mention of Yitzias Mitzrayim in Kiddush. Vadai Eino Yotzei min haTorah klal. Umemer Mefureshesi B'li Cholek Dinilmad Migzeres Shava. Everybody agrees that you have to mention Yitzias Mitzrayim in Kiddush, and that's derived from Gzeres Shava. And earlier in the same paragraph, he writes, V'hine mevur b'psachim kuf yud zayin amid beis, Omar of Acha Bar Yaakov, Tzorach lahazkir Yitzias Mitzrayim b'Kiddush Hayom, Ksiv hacha leman tizkars yom tzeischom eretz Mitzrayim, uksiv hasam zochers yom Shabbos lekadsho. So we have a Gzeres Shava of Zachar. Says the Minchas Chinuch, the Ein Cholek al members. We don't find anyone who disagrees with this statement of Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, quoted in Psachim Kuf Yud Zayin Amid Beis, and therefore he says, Pashut the Min HaTorah im lo hizkir Yitzias Mitzrayim lo yotza klal kevan de nilmad b'Gzeres Shava. Gzeres Shava havi kegufei Torah. And he goes on and on about the status of Gzeres Shava. So just to summarize, we have a Magen Avraham, which apparently was accepted universally by all Achronim, that you can be Yotzei Kiddush Doraisa without Yayin by reciting Kiddush in Tefillah. Then we have a Gemara in Psachim on Kuf Yud Zayin Amid Beis that derives from a Gzeres Shava Zochar Zochar, that you cannot fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush without Zecher Yitzias Mitzrayim. And that leads us to the third point, and that's the Minchas Chinuch's kasha. How could you tell me that you were Yotzei through Tefillah? There's no mention of Yitzias Mitzrayim in Tefillah. Is everybody following me? Yes, no, maybe so? Do you remember this discussion that we had? Okay. There's a little bit of background noise. I'm going to try to do whatever I can, maybe. Okay. So now we take a look at the Chafetz Chaim, who offers an answer to the question of the Minchas Chinuch. And what page is this on? Let me just check the pages again. This is on page Lamed Tes, if you happen to have this booklet. And it's the Bir Halacha, right here in Simon Reish Ayin Aleph. He writes, Ulanias daiti yesh li yashiv. He says, Keman din mazkir Pasuk v'shamru b'nei Yisrael sashabos tekef lashkivenu. Okay, this is a gigantic controversy. The Gaon was opposed to this, but I would assume that in your, if I remember correctly, in your Keilah, they recite, we sing it, Shomer Yisrael Shabbos, right after Kriyat Shema and before the Kaddish and the Shmon Esrei. And he says, Shehi Geula Richta. So he says the following, that the bracha right before Vishamru is Hashkivenu. And the Gemara in Masechta Brachos asks, how can we insert another bracha after Gal Yisrael? We have to be Somech Gula Tefillah. And even though Gula Tefillah is less imposing in Arvis than in Shachris, but nevertheless, we don't want to be mafsik. But the Gemara has the principle of Geula Richta. So we have now Geula Richta, which bridges between Kriyat Shema and V'shomer Yisrael Shabbos. The Hashkivenu sort of links up the Kriyat Shema together with V'shamru. You have that? V'shamru. And he says the following. Dai b'zeh min haTorah, sheyesh ba shvacho shel Yom HaShabbos. So that's what the Mishnah Berurah says in the Bir Aloch. So it means that in Kriyat Shema we mention Yetzias Mitzrayim in the 3rd chapter of Kriyat Shema, and then in the Birchas Kriyat Shema afterwards we speak about Mi Mitzrayim Galtonu, etc., etc. And then afterwards we say Hashkivenu. Hashkivenu has no mention of Yetzias Mitzrayim, but it's called Geula Richta. So it's an extension of the Geula that we spoke about in Birchas Kriyat Shema in Gal Yisrael, and it has Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim. So that after Hashkivenu, we're going to recite Vishamru. And in Vishamru, we are going to be mentioning Shabbos. So if you take this whole long series that ends with Vishamru, you have a mitzvah dorais of Kiddush. Again, he admits that it's a little difficult because we haven't yet mentioned anything about the Kedushas Hayom, but B'shomer Yisrael Shabbos, Lasos Shabbos, so we do mention the Shabbos. You may recall that according to Rabbi Kivega, just saying good Shabbos might be enough b'doraisa to be able to, just to mention good Shabbos, Zocher es Yom HaShabbos. Again, the Lekadsho here is missing, and that we'll find in the paragraph in Maariv, which is Mekadesh HaShabbos. But nevertheless, we do mention Shabbos. So where do we mention Yetzias Mitzrayim? That's in Kriyat Shema, the 3rd bracha, and in Birchas Gal Yisrael, which is the bracha liachreya, and that leads up to Vishamru. The only thing in between that wedges is Hashkivenu, but that's Geula Richta. So it's not a hefsek. So basically, even though we've really changed the theme here, and the theme of Yetzias Mitzrayim came before Hashkivenu, the theme of Shabbos came after Hashkivenu in Vishamru, but nevertheless, despite the machitza, or the chatzitza down the middle of Hashkivenu, we can attach A to C, and those two elements together create Kiddush Doraisa. We have Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim, we have mentioning the Shabbos, and the only thing that wedges in between, which you might have considered a hefsek, is Hashkivenu. So again, it comes out according to the Bir Halacha that it's really not Kiddush in Tefillah. We saw in the Magen Avraham, if you recall, that you were yotzei the mitzvah doraisa of Kiddush in Tefillah. The Magen Avraham gives us no impression that even before Tefillah, you were yotzei through Vishamru. again, I can't tell you one way or the other whether or not the Magen Avraham recited Vishamru. But even if I grant you that he did recite Vishamru, and therefore you have the Bir Alocha's answer, I don't know why the Magen Avraham writes that you were Yotzei Yochiv Kiddush in Tefillah when Vishamru comes before Tefillah. So in order to accept the thesis of the Bir Alocha, you have to make the following assumptions. Premise number one is that Hashkivenu, insofar as it's Gula Richta, is not a hefsek, and therefore, if it's not a hefsek, we can integrate the mention of Yetzias Mitzrayim before Hashkivenu, together with Vishamru. You have to make a second assumption that the fact that we declare that Bnei Yisrael observe the Shabbos, Vishamru Yisos Shabbos, L'dorosam, that itself is a kiyum of Zochres Yom HaShabbos HaKadsho. And you have to assume the third premise is that the Magen Avraham had this in mind when he said that you could be Yotzei your mitzvah of Kiddush D'Oraisa and Tefillah, whereas Vishamru comes before Tefillah, if it comes at all. So those are the three premises that the Bir Alocha is operating. Okay, let's go on. I would like to suggest another possible answer to the question of the Minchas Chinuch. So I'm going to put this on the side, and we're going to open up to Bereishis Perek Beis. Vayichlu hashamayim va'aretz. Now, if you take a look at the pasuk that ends this section of Vayichulu, it says, "Vayivarech Elokim es Yom Hashvi vayikadesh oso, ki vo shavas mikol malachto, asher bara Elokim." Is that what it says? I left out a word for pedagogical reasons. The last word in that pasuk is lasos. And all the Mefarshim, starting from the Medrash, all the way down to contemporary biurim on the Torah, they all are bothered by the extra word lasos, because the pasuk reads beautifully without the word lasos. God sanctifies the Shabbos and resists any malach of creating, the 39 malachas, asher bara Elokim. And then it says lasos. So I did a little bit of research on the word lasos. And the best place to begin with, if you're familiar with the Torah Shlema of Menachem Kasher, and he's got pages and pages of midrashim on the word lasos. Now, the word lasos obviously means to do. So we're talking about some sort of action. And at the end of these many, many different commentaries, Rabbi Menachem Kasher does us a great service, and he summarizes 7 different interpretations in the Medrash of what the word lasos means. And basically, it divides up into 2 camps. One camp says that the word lasos refers to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and God is involved in Asiyah. And for example, you have, I'm just going to look at the, I should have printed it out, but I didn't, sorry. You have, for example, Rashi, which goes with this approach. And Rashi writes, that the word lasos indicates that Hashem doubled up the malacha. There was the malacha of Yom HaShishi, and then there was supposed to be malacha on Yom HaShvi, and the pasuk is telling me that HaKadosh Baruch Hu got involved in all the malachas of Yom HaShvi on Yom HaShishi. So he doubled his malachas. Okay, then, but again, what's common to almost all the Mefarshim is that Adayin Yesh Malach Acheres. Those are the four key words here. Meaning, Lasos indicates that there's more malach. Rashi says the more malach was done as a double on Friday. The Ramban says, and again, there are many, many Mefarshim, I'm just giving you a few. The Ramban says that the additional malach of Lasos is what's called Bria Yesh Me'yesh, meaning in the 6 days, God created Yesh Me'ayin, and the Lasos, which means, as we said, Adayin Yesh Malacha Lasos, that's the malacha of Yesh Me'yesh. We put two things together that were already created. So the 6 days is Ex Nihilo, and then we go on to another level. It's not Yitzir, it's called Bria. Again, there's a whole philosophical discussion about this. So that's one camp. And that camp represents, Lasos means that God is continuing to create, or he doubled up his creation on Friday. However, if you look at the Psikta Zutrasa, which is quoted here in the Torah Shlema, he writes that let me just see if I have the entire Lashon Psikta here on this page. Maybe I didn't copy the whole Psikta. Oh yeah, here it is. All right, are you listening to this? I tried to bold it if you got the page. He says the following. Adayin yesh malach acheres. Lasos means there's still another malach. Who is going to implement that malacha? Ba Shlomo HaMelech, ubada beis hamikdash. Omar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, achshav shlema melecha shamayim v'aretz. There's melecha shamayim that was completed on Shabbos or right before Shabbos of Breishis, and then there's the malacha of man, and that's the Lasos. What is the malach, the active creation of man? It's Shlomo HaMelech building the Beis HaMikdash. And God says now, when Shlomo HaMelech completes the Mikdash, we now have a complete malacha. It's now, number one, Melecha Shamayim, and number two, it's Melecha Sa'aretz, and then Vatishlam Kol HaMalacha, which is a pasuk in Sefer Malachim. So that's the psikta on the word Lasos. Do you see where we are now at a crossroads, at a fork in the road, so to speak, and now the Lasos is referring to man. So the active agent, which is called Lasos, right? Lasos is active. In addition to God's divine action of malacha, now there's another asiyah, which is going to complete the asiyah, the creation, and that's going to be implemented by man. In this case, according to Psikta, it's Shlomo HaMelech. The Kli Yakar, which I found, again, there's a lot in the Mefarshim. I'd need another 10 years to figure this all out, but the Kli Yakar says that there are two types of malachos. There's physical malachos, like creation in the world, where you add something to the universe. And then there's another type of creation, which is called Lasos Becharoshes Eitz Chaim Torani. Pile Plod. He's saying that menucha, the concept of menucha, has two parts to it. It's a dual concept. It's the menucha of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, kaviyachol, whatever that means, that God rested. And then there's our menucha. The difference is very fundamental. God's menucha is shevi alta, it's pulling back. Our menucha is kum vase, is active. That's lasos. How do we achieve lasos and menucha? By studying Torah. So the study of Torah on Shabbos is called lasos. A whole different concept of malacha. But once again, we see from the Kli Yakar that he's also learning that the lasos refers to man. Man becomes the active agent. In this case, not Shlomo Melech building the Mikdash, but each and every one of us studying Torah on Shabbos. Then I took a look in Rav Soloveitchik. We have now a very fine anthology. Rav Soloveitchik never published a Pirush on the Torah, but the OU has done a great service. It's called Mesoras Harav, and they anthologized Rav Soloveitchik's insights into the Torah. And I tried to send this to David Spiegel in my great photography. I don't know if it came out, but I'm not a great photographer. And he writes the following: Asher bara Elokim lasos. Lasos means that man is charged to carry on the work that was ended by God on the seventh day. Do you hear this? Man is charged. The lasos is addressing man. As creation itself was left incomplete. That's a pretty chutzpahdik statement. Okay, but it reminds me of Rabbi Akiva's statement about the Milah, the Bris Milah, when Tarnus Rufus attacked him. How could God's creation be complete when he commanded you to do the Milah, right? Okay, fine. What is the imperfection in the creation of God, meaning that we have to step up to the rink, I guess you'd say in Canada, right? And somehow complete and perfect the world, the existence of evil. Okay, this is so relevant to what's going on now in Gaza, and we have to do the same. I don't know how to Hezbollah and then to Iran. All the enemies, even on the U of T campus, wherever the enemies are, the existence of evil, which reflects the imperfection of creation. God gave us the great assignment of participating in the progressive work of creation. We are progressing right. That's what we saw in the Medrash, that God declared that the creation of Allah is not complete. And then he goes on to say that Judaism is a religion of activism against evil, etc., etc. Okay. In the light of all this, I want to mention to you the Beis HaLevi. Now, you can find this in the Beis HaLevi on Torah. I photocopied it, or photographed it, I should say, from the Beis HaLevi on the Haggadah. Again, there is no such thing as the Beis HaLevi on the Haggadah. This is an anthology of the writings of the Beis HaLevi. And I was very excited because the Beis HaLevi is attached to the words in Kiddush that we recite on Yayin, of Zecher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim. And he writes the following: Isa b'Medrash. Okay, I'm not going to read it through. You're probably all familiar with this Medrash anyway, that there were 6 days of creation, which can be broken down into 3 groups of 2. And the 2 represent, according to the Medrash, male and female that are operating together. And that's called the Zug. But when we get to Yom HaShvi, which is the odd man out, so to speak, Shabbos comes in front of the Ribbon Shalom Kaviyachal to complain, I don't have a Zug. Meaning whatever Shabbos is meant to achieve, it needs a partner. because all of the creation works in partnership. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu answers the Malachim by giving that Zug, the partner of Shabbos, to Knesset Yisrael. Knesset Yisrael now becomes the partner with Shabbos. And the Beis Halevi develops a very deep philosophical idea that before God created the world, everything was one. There was no room for anything but the Almighty. Divinity was throughout everything. And with creation, divinity became nistar, nelam. It now is hidden behind creation. And the process of being megala kvod shamayim means to find God in nature. And Shabbos is going to be that great agent to reveal the kvod shamayim in the creation itself. But Shabbos itself needs a partner, and that's going to be Knesset Yisrael. And Knesset Yisrael, once it emerges, which is after Yetzias Mitzrayim, is now tasked to be Megala Kvod Shamayim in the Bria together with the Shabbos, as a shituf pula, to use a modern Israeli phrase. So there's a partnership of Shabbos and Knesset Yisrael to achieve that Gili Kvod Shamayim in the Bria and reveal that which is Nelam, that which is hidden. So therefore, in Kiddush, says the Beis Halevi, we have a double Zecher. We have Zecher L'Maaseh Bereishis, and that's referring to the divine aspect of Shabbos. And then we have Zecher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim, which is the human aspect of Shabbos. And Zecher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim represents the emergence of Klal Yisrael as a nation and Klal Yisrael is tasked to join up and partner with the Shabbos to be Megala Kvod Shamayim. Now, in this Haggadah, the Beis Halevi quotes the Brisker Rav, which I did not photocopy for you, so I'll just tell it over to you. It's pretty short. I'll just find it for a second. Oh, here it is. It appears in the Griz al Torah for Parshas Kitisa, which I have somewhere in my library. I don't know where, but anyway, I'm going to read it from the Haggadah mi Beis Halevi, and he writes in a typical Brisker style: "Hine b'Shabbos ika shnei dvarim." Right, there are two dimensions to Shabbos. Chada Tehi Zecher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim. It's a pella, Rabbosai. You know, when you think about it, to say that Shabbos is Zecher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim, but again, that's everything that we're discussing today, because the Gemara in Pesachim Daf Kuf Yud Zayin derives from Gzeira Shava that Kiddush on Shabbos requires Zecher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim. So obviously, this is a dimension of Shabbos. And what is Zecher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim? Yesod lebechiras ukdushas Yisrael. Tichsiv asher otzeisi eschem me'eretz Mitzrayim lios lachem Elokim. Uksiv hamala eschem me'eretz Mitzrayim lios lachem, etc. V'yisam kedoshim v'kodesh ani. He gives a whole slew of psukim to indicate that Zecher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim means that God chose Klal Yisrael, sanctified Klal Yisrael, and they are now meant to be Makadesh, Shem Shamayim, V'yisam kedoshim. V'shedis, the other dimension of Shabbos, is Zikaron L'Maaseh Bereishis. And he says that it's all in Kisheshis Yomim. Now, he doesn't go through the entire pasuk, he just quotes Kisheshis Yomim. But in any event, in the light of this background introduction, I want to share with you an amazing revolutionary Kiddush of my Rebbe, Rav Soloveitchik, in a yahrzeit shir that he gave on Gimel Shvat many years ago. That's published in this work called Shiurim L'Zecher Maariv. And again, I apologize if the photography is not good, but you should have it in your either WhatsApp or email, wherever David sent it, I don't know. In this shir, which was written up subsequently and entitled Be'inyan Kiddush K'Mekadesh HaShabbos, that the essence of Kiddush is to sanctify the Shabbos. And again, he starts with a barrage of no less than 7 kashas. We don't have time now for 7 kashas. It would take us probably, the shir itself lasted for 4 to 6 hours. 1,000 people came to hear the shir. But I'm going to focus our attention on 2 of the 7 questions. The first question is very simply, in Musaf, we say, Oz mi Sinai nitztavu aleh, meaning that the tzivui of Shabbos is in the Aseret Dibros, which we got at Sinai. But then we know that the Gemara says in Sanhedrin that we already received the tzivui of Shabbos in Mora right after Yetzias Mitzrayim. So how can we say in Tefillah, Oz mi Sinai nitztavu aleh? And again, if you're putting on your Briscoe thinking caps, you're already jumping to the conclusion that apparently there's a difference fundamentally between the Shabbos that we got at Mora, right after Yetzias Mitzrayim, and the Shabbos that we received 7 weeks later at Sinai. 2 dimensions of Shabbos. Then I'm fast forwarding from that first kash of the 7 to the 4th, and he quotes a Gemara Psachim Kuf Hey. The Gemara has a question: if, let's say, you have a mitzvah to fulfill, and at the same time you're charged with the mitzvah of Kiddush, or in Havdalah you have a mitzvah to fulfill, but yet you have to recite Havdalah, which comes first? And the Gemara makes the following distinction, that with regard to Kiddush, Kiddush comes first. Put aside any other mitzvah. With regard to Havdalah, a mitzvah comes first. And the Gemara explains why. Shani Lun, we make a distinction, ben Iyule Yoma, Lafuki Yoma. Iyule Yoma means Knisat HaYom. And Afuki Yoma means Yitziat HaYom. So the Gemara establishes that Kol Kama Demakdinan Le Adif, that because of this dimension of Kiddush, of Iyule Yoma, that it brings in the Shabbos, therefore it gets a superior status, and we push off any mitzvah. But Havdalah is Lafuki Yom. And Rav Soloveitchik is very bothered by this, because the Gemara is not talking about Shabbos itself, it's talking about the mitzvah of Kiddush. V'chi Kiddush, asks the Rav, Machnis is a Shabbos? Kiddush doesn't bring in the Shabbos. We know that Shabbos is Kvir V'kaimei. It is a Kedusha that comes down from Shemayim every 7th day, whether or not we recite Kiddush. And furthermore, when we recite a bracha on Shabbos, whether it's in Tefillah or wherever we recite a bracha in Birkas Hamazon, so we're not going to mention Yisrael, we're going to mention Mekadesh HaShabbos. In contradistinction, when it comes to Moadim, or Rosh Chodesh, today's Rosh Chodesh, we say Mekadesh Yisrael ve'hamoadim, ve'azman. And the reason for that is obvious, because the first mitzvah that we get after Yetzias Mitzrayim, HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem Rosh Chodashim, imposes on us an obligation to sanctify time. And the Gimel Regolim are sanctified by Klal Yisrael. So God, so to speak, throws the ball into our court, or the puck in our rink in the court. I don't know enough about hockey, but anyway, so we now have to be Makadesh the Zman. But Shabbos is a Kedusha Kvi V'kaimei, and therefore we don't mention Yisrael. So far, so good. Now Rav Soloveitchik, in order to answer these questions, he points out that there's a Pele in Parshas Emor. So this is a Dvar Torah for Emor. Why? In Emor, it says, "Vaydaber Hashem es Moshe el Moshe lemor, daber el bnei Yisrael v'marta aleim moadei Hashem, asher tikru osam mikrai kodesh," which means you have to sanctify the day. Elahei moadai, right? Colon. These are the moadim, which are called mikrai kodesh. And what's the next word in the Torah? Sheishis yomim tasim alatecha. So again, Shabbos is called Mikra Kodesh. But even more so, Shabbos is listed right after Eila He Moadai. What does that mean? And how do we take Mikra Kodesh and apply it to Shabbos? So, of course, in typical Brisker style, there's Tzvei Dinim. There are two dimensions to Shabbos. There's a dimension of Shabbos, pure Shabbos, and then there's a dimension of Moadim, which is hidden. Kedushas Moadim hagnuza b'Shabbos. Latent in Shabbos is Kedushas Moadim. And it comes under Elu Moadei Hashem. And Tikru Osam. He says, Yesh l'Shabbos Kedusha Kfula. This is on the bottom of page Kuf Mem Gimel. He says, Kedusha Shabbos Breishis. There's a Kedusha Breishis, Mishesh Yisumei HaMaseh, and Kedusha Zunis Kadsha B'Yom HaShvi Al Yidei HaKadosh Baruch Hu Vayvorach Elokim Es Yom HaShvi Vayikadish Osam. Now that Kedusha is Kviya V'Kaimei, and that's Kedusha of Ma'aseh Breishis. Hayom Niskadish Kodem Matan Torah. Number 2, Kedushas Yontif Umoed Shenitna Yisrael Achrei Yitzeis Yisrael MiMitzrayim. Kibo Yeser HaMoadim. Following Yitzias Mitzrayim, we are given a commission or a mission to sanctify Shabbos with Kedushas Moadim that is initiated by Klal Yisrael. He goes on to say again, there's a lot to go through here. I'm just summarizing and highlighting that there's a fundamental difference between how and in what way we are Makadish the Moadim, and who will be Makadish the Moadim, and who will be Makadish Shabbos as a Moed. With regard to the Moadim, it's Bezdin. But again, Bezdin is really representing Klal Yisrael. So in any event, with Moadim, it means Makadish Yisrael, and therefore Yisrael is Makadish the Zmanim. And now, even on Shabbos, it's Yisrael that's Makadish the Shabbos, because we're adding another dimension to Shabbos, and that's the dimension of Kedushas Moadim. Because Shabbos has two dimensions, two Kedushas. Kedushas Shabbos and Kedushas Moadim. And we have to actively generate Kedushas Moadim, and even on Shabbos, we have to activate in a Kuva say to be Makadesh Shabbos with Kedushas Moadim. But it's not Bezdin that's adding or generating the Kedushas Moadim of Shabbos, but rather it's Kiddush. The Kiddush that we recite is Zokras Yom HaShabbos Lekadsho, means to be Makadesh the Shabbos by adding the dimension of Kedushas Moadim to Shabbos, and that's exactly what we're meant to achieve when we recite Kiddush. He goes on to develop the idea that in Mara, right after Yetzias Mitzrayim, when Klal Yisrael were chosen, that's where they were given the task of creating a Kedushas Moadim every seventh day. Later on, at Har Sinai, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if you read the Aseret HaDibros, you'll see that God sanctifies the seventh day. That's the Kedusha of V'Kaimei that is generated by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. However, and this I found absolutely stunning, Rav Soloveitchik says that we have two sets of Aseret HaDibros. Right? We have one in Parshas Yisro and another one in Parshas V'Eschanan. And Shabbos appears, of course, in both Dibros Rishonos and Dibros Shnios, but there's a fundamental difference between the two. He writes, that in the second set of luchos, which I think is in Dvarim Perek Hey, if I remember correctly, it says, Sheishes yomim tavod v'asisa kol malachtecha v'yom shvi Shabbos Hashem Elokecha lo tasu kol malacha v'zacharta ki eved hayisa b'eretz Mitzrayim v'yotziacha Hashem Elokecha misham b'yod chazak kazon tu yal kein tzivcha Hashem Elokecha lasos es yom HaShabbos. In the second set of Dibros, after mentioning Yetzias Mitzrayim, it says lasos. That lasos indicates that we have to create the Shabbos. That's what's inherent in the word lasos. And what aspect of Shabbos do we create after Yetzias Mitzrayim? The aspect of Moadim. And we generate that Kedusha. However, if you go back to the Dibros Rishonos, the word lasos is completely omitted. Ki sheishes yomim asa Hashemes hashamayim v'sa'aretz hasiyom v'eskol sherbom v'yonach v'yom hashvi al kein berach Hashemes yom haShabbos kadsha v'yikadsheu. Who is sanctifying the Shabbos? Hashem. No mention of Yetzias Mitzrayim, no mention of lasos. He says, Yeshna bechina achas b'kedusha Shabbos shechala al yidei pu'ulas Kiddush ukvius kimoadim umitzvahs Kiddush she mitzvah min Torah he chovel lekadesh es hayom mamish to sanctify the day. The osa Kiddusha that we sanctify, which is written in Parshas Emor and the Parshas of Moadim, is chala al yidei ma'aseh Kiddush when we recite Kiddush, Zochos Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsha. And you know where I'm going with this, Rabbi Osai. I mean, I'm sure you guessed the punchline. The punchline is that we now appreciate why Kiddush has to have two dimensions to it. It's got to have Zecher L'Maaseh Bereishis, that's a Kiddush of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that is written in the first set of Luchos. And we need Zecher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim to make it into Mikroi Kodesh, in which we as Klal Yisrael that were chosen at the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim are commanded to be Makadesh the Shabbos with Kedushas Moadim. And that's lasos.
I have a question.
And now I go back to the paragraph in Tefillah, Vayavorech Elokim es Yom HaShvi Vayikadesh Oso Ki Vo Shavas Mikol Torah Bar Elohim lasos. And we asked, what is lasos? And we broke it down into two camps. But the camp that interests me today is the camp that assumes that lasos is a charge to Klal Yisrael. And it's the same word of lasos, excuse me, that appears in the second set of Luchos, together with Yetzias Mitzrayim, which, according to Rav Soloveitchik, commands us to sanctify the Shabbos.
I have a question.
Just give me one more second, David, and then I finish my whole presentation, and you're on.
Okay, thank you.
Okay?
Yeah.
I think herein lies the answer to the Minchas Chinas Kasha. The last word before we mentioned Reishis in the Tefillah is lasos, meaning that God has charged us with the mission of lasos to sanctify the Shabbos. That itself is Zecher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim, because through Yetzias Mitzrayim we were chosen, sanctified, and given the task and the ability to be Makadesh the Shabbos with Kedushas Moadim. Hence, Shabbos is called in the Torah Mikroi Kodesh and comes under Elu Hei Moadai. Is Memela, even though we don't mention Mitzrayim, but the whole purpose of mentioning Mitzrayim is not because of the mitzvahs of Zechor Asher Otzeisi Eschem Mitzrayim Kol Yimei Chayecha. No, that's not the point. We're going to fulfill that mitzvah of Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim twice a day. We don't need Kiddush for that. What we need is to indicate that God sanctified us when He took us out of Mitzrayim with Azak Kedusha, that sanctity, that we can now be Mekadosh the Shabbos. That's why in Kiddush we mention Yitzias Mitzrayim. And even if the Kiddush al Yayin mentions Yitzias Mitzrayim explicitly, not relying on our, detective work, but in Tefillah, says the Magen Avraham, you could be Yotze even without mentioning Yitzias Mitzrayim with the word Lasos. Go ahead, David, you're on board.
Okay, so there's a number of Farshim who say that the difference between the first Luchais and the second Luchais is that the first is the mitzvah to say, because it's Zachar. The second set is Shomer, which is mitzvah to say, the 39 Malachas and so on. So it seems like, according to this, they don't agree with the entire shut, because the Lasois aspect, right, is the positive commandments of saying Kiddush and so on. And Shomer is a negative aspect. So I guess there's some kind of machlokes here, shot about what Shomer and Zachar actually mean. You would think about that?
Again, Zachar means Kiddush, Bekuvasei, and Shomer means to resist, to abstain from Malacha.
Right, but
is that your...
negative aspect Shabbos, Lysis is, right? You're saying Lasois, Mitzrayim, is to actively Mekadesh the Moed of Shabbos. So
right. So
right,
that's the Kuvasei of Zachar.
Right. So you would have thought the Yitzias Mitzrayim should have been mentioned by Yisro, not by Vestana, because Yisro is all the positive aspects.
I see. You mean if we open up the second set of Luchos, there it says Shomer, it doesn't say Zachar. Is that your point?
Exactly, yes.
All right. I'll trust you for that. I don't have a chumash in front of me, but I'm sure you know what you're talking about. Okay, it's a good point. But let me ask you a different question, David.
Yeah.
And I would like everyone to listen carefully to what I want to say, because this is mind-boggling. There's something called Ba, Bo, and Bum.
Of course.
Which means that on Friday night, we say Ba to describe the Shabbos.
Yep.
In the morning, in davening, Shachris, we say Bo.
And Muslim.
And Mincha time, we say Bum.
Together, right.
And again, there's a lot of deep, discussion about this in Kabbalah, in the Arizal, and so forth, way beyond my pay scale.
Rabbi Berzon, you spoke about this, about the Ramban going back quite a few years in the morning shir on Shabbos.
When we used to dance in order to keep ourselves warm if they didn't come on time to open up the yeshiva there.
Yeah.
Interesting. I don't remember what I spoke about inside the the Archaim yeshiva, but I do remember being freezing when they came late with the of course, there was David Spiegel, who I always saw in Midvale, in his undershirt. And I said to him, what's going on, David? It's like freezing, And he would say, Rabbi Berzon, how long have you been in Canada? And I would say a year. He says, well, I've been here for 75 years. He said, that was 20 years ago. I said, what do you mean 75 years? You're only 35. So he said, well, my father was here, my grandfather was here. Anyway, yeah, so I spoke about it then. I don't know what I said then, but probably forget about what I said then. Just listen to what I say now. What I'm saying now is that Shabbos is feminine on Friday night.
Yep.
V'yanuchu va. She's described as a woman. Now, the difference between Zachar and Nekeva is active and passive.
Nice in the couple.
Shabbos on Friday night plays a passive role. Why? Because we have to actively be Mekadesh the Shabbos and add the Kedushas Moadim to Shabbos. Once we do so, the Kedushas Shabbos is Shlema U'Gemura, and now on Shabbos in the daytime, Shabbos is described as a male, as Bo, because now what bounces off the Shabbos is a Kedusha, Shlema U'Gemura, that now sanctifies us, and we become the Makablin. Yeah. And I just want to point out that I saw something very similar to this idea in the writings of Reb David Cohen. I don't know if you heard the name of David Cohen. I mean, there's a David Cohen in Brooklyn. I'm not talking about that David Cohen. There are probably a million David Cohens, like it's Yankel Schwartz. I don't know. But anyway, there's a David Cohen who's the Rosh Yeshiva of the second largest yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael. I think it is. That's the Chevron Yeshiva. Has over 1,000 students. I learned by his father, Rav Yosef Cohen, Zichrono Livracha, in the Harry Fischel Beis Medrash. Anyway, so Rav David Cohen has something similar to this idea of Li Neder. If you're interested, let me know and I'll send it to you. It's on a site called Olamot, which you may remember when I was in Canada. I used to quote that very often. I haven't seen it in years, but I wish I had time to get back into it. So do you hear this? According to Rav Soloveitchik, that the mitzvah of Kiddush is our sanctity to sanctify the Shabbos. It makes sense that Shabbos is feminine on the receiving end, and hence it's ba. Once we sanctify the Shabbos through Kiddush, henceforth Shabbos is complete, has both dimensions of its Kedusha, and now it boomerangs onto us and sanctifies us with a full-fledged Kedusha Shabbos, and therefore Shabbos is now the active agent, which is called Bo. I think that's a nice postscript to our discussion.
Beautiful.
So in any event, Rabosai, this thought occurred to my mind, putting together all these different pieces of the puzzle, and I'd like to even publish this. I don't know. I know Rav Goldberg is not alive anymore. He used to have something called Amek something or other. What was it called? I wrote for it at least once, maybe even twice.
The Amek.
What was it called? Ha-Amek, maybe.
Yeah.
Rav Goldberg's incredible. I can't believe he's not alive. I mean, it's hard for me.
Rav Berzon. Rav Berzon, can you hear me?
I hear you, Bobby, but you don't have to call me on the phone. I see you on Zoom.
Yeah. The bracha. What about the bracha? Baruch atah Hashem mikadesh Yisrael b'yom HaShabbos. Should
right.
be.
So the Rav says the following. He's aware of this kasha. And the way I understand it, just bekitzur, he says that the reason why Yisrael is omitted in Shabbos, in the bracha of Shabbos, even though it should be there, is because the spectator might misunderstand that as if Shabbos only has a Kedushas Maariv. So to make sure that we understand that in contrast to all the Maariv, Shabbos has its own inherent Kedusha of a Kaddish. So therefore they decided to omit the word Yisrael. I mean, again, there's a lot to talk about here. But it's an interesting idea that maybe the Vayechulu, which culminates with lassos, and the lassos is sort of like a reference, not a reference, a hint, an allusion to the lassos of the second set of Dibros, which is Mikrai Kodesh. And by the way, it's very interesting. If you take a look at the davening for Yontif, which starts with, in the Tefillah, Ata v'chartanu, the Ata v'chartanu ends with Mikrai Kodesh Zeichel Yitzias Mitzrayim. Did you ever notice that? You take out a siddur for Moadim, you'll see it. It means that the Zeichel Yitzias Mitzrayim is connected with the concept of Mikrai Kodesh. And now we're saying that, and it's in Parshas Emor, it's mamish black and white, that the Mikrai Kodesh is a description of Shabbos, no less than it is a Moadim, meaning you have the same Mikrai Kodesh, call the Shabbos Kodesh, and that actually engenders a Kedusha of Moadim to Shabbos, and that is called Zeichel Yitzias Mitzrayim. So the Nusach HaTfilah actually identifies two concepts, Zeichel Yitzias Mitzrayim with Mikrai Kodesh. And according to the Brisker Rav, that with Yitzias Mitzrayim, God shows us and vested in us a Kedusha, such that now we can be Makadesh the Shabbos. Well, if that be the case, then we understand that Zeichel Yitzias Mitzrayim is really an allusion to Mikrai Kodesh, meaning that we call the Shabbos and engender the Kedusha of Shabbos of Moed.
One other point is that means that the lassos in Bereshis is like a nevuah.
Correct.
In other words, because there was no,
and that nevuah does not and that nevuah does not depend on Har Sinai, because already before Har Sinai with Yitzias Mitzrayim, so we're going to connect the lassos. I'm curious to know. Again, this is this is begetter dok v'tishkach. Don't even think about what I'm about to say. It's not even worthy of wasting your time. But I would love to look in, they have now research of old Siddurim. What was the nusach of the Siddur way back when? You have the Avraham, but you have even earlier commentaries. I'm wondering if there's any commentary that instead of Vayvarach Elokim es Yom HaShvi v'Kadish Oso would substitute the parsha in the Aseres HaDivra, where Lasos is explicitly referring to Zeichel Yitzias Mitzrayim, and it's written in the same pasuk. That would be fascinating if we ever found such a siddur. But in the absence of such a siddur, I'm gonna build my case on the word Lasos.
In other words, you could say that the Lasos was a charge to mankind, but they failed until the Jews came along and the Yitzias Mitzrayim happened, and then the Lasos was implemented again.
Maybe you're right. That Shabbos was initially a universal concept, and then we see how man messed up. Especially the process of what we call sinun. Of siphoning out. Whether it's Yishmael, whether it's Esav. I just want to add one point here, and it's a pella to me. I went through this drush of the Rav, and he doesn't mention this. But I think I figured out why he rejected what I'm about to say, and therefore he left it out. The Gemara tells us in Masechta Shabbos that if you get stuck in a midbar and you are totally, totally unaware of which day is Yom HaShvi, it could have been the day you landed in the midbar and you lost count of the days. It could have been the day after the day. So the Gemara says he counts 7 days. Right? Imagine if he'd have to be, again, if you were brisker, you would probably observe Shabbos for 7 days. But if it's humanly impossible to do so, but the Gemara says he counts 7 days, and you observe the 7th day of Shabbos as Shabbos. Now, I'm not a mathematician, and I certainly didn't take statistics in college. My older sister already warned me about statistics. It's like the only course you got a D in college. All the rest are A's. Anyway, so I can tell you this, the chances that if you count 7 days, that day is actually Shabbos, are about 14%, 1/7. 14 and change. So imagine observing the Shabbos based on 14%. I would say it's batal u'mevutal. Again, you have to share bittul when it comes to Yomim, but maybe it's a davar sheish l'mayim. I don't know, whatever it is. But at least I can add one dimension, one piece of the puzzle that might, to some extent, how should I say, diminish the severity of the kasha. And that is that man was tasked lasos to create Shabbos, to generate a Kedusha. And maybe in the case of Midbar, there's a halacha that an individual who's in a Midbar is given, I don't know if it's Doraisa or Rabban, I can't tell you, but is given the authority or the power to initiate a Kedusha Shabbos. So what you'd end up with on that day number 7 in your counting, I should say yesterday we counted 6. I shouldn't have said today we counted 7. But anyway, nobody laughed. So, by the way, did they still? What's my friend's name who used to produce that card? What's his name? With all the days and tell you what day of the week you should count, which day of the over.
Jack Hirschman.
Who?
Jack Hirschman.
Oh, Jack. If you see Jack, tell him to send me that card. I get very confused.
It's funny. I saw him this morning. He just came from this morning from being in Florida since Chanukah time, and I said people are still bothering me. A lot of people. They want to see that serious Eimer chart. A lot of people ask me about it.
Right.
I say, is the mad for it?
So anyway, I'm just that was just a side joke. But what I'm saying is that when he declares that day number 7 is Shabbos, he is now fulfilling Lasos. That Shabbos has Kedushas Moadim. And if you'd ask me, again, this would be way out, I would say that if he would violate the Shabbos on his Shabbos, which is day 7, he would not be Chayav Koretz. He would not be Chayav Bisa. It only has Kedushas Moadim. Maybe he'd be allowed to cook Litzarech Ochel Nefesh. I don't know. Okay, Rabbosai, I think we'll stop here. I really meant to get back into Tosefah Shabbos, but in any event, I hope you enjoyed the shiur. I worked very, very hard on the shiur, and
Fantastic.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Are you
just
gonna?
get back to me and tell me if this Ha'emek is still in existence, and maybe I would write it up and send it, back.
Write
to
it up anyways. Write
What?
it up. Write it up. One way
Yeah,
or the
no,
other,
but
write
I'm
it
just
up.
what would
I know.
motivate me to write it up. I have it in a form, but it's not yet, would be if I could publish it, because I really think there's some Torah here to offer another suggestion besides
not
the
saying-
Biur Halacha. What?
And I'm not saying from the Rav stuff on Aruch Sheva, except for not on Aruch Sheva, on what YouTube, except for the daf. You're not giving any other shiurim these days.
Well, I took a break for Pesach, but I gave a shiur last night, which will be on YouTube. This year
Okay.
will be on YouTube. It's Hashem.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Beseder.
that's it. Zeu zeh.
Okay.
Okay then. I was
I
thinking.
think-
Just 1 second. One question. I don't want to record